Competent Communication Manual. It's called Getting Comfortable with Visual Aids. His title of his speech is, If You Can't Be a Rock Star, Be a Roadie. Mark's adult lifelong friend, Jay Moglia, died recently at the age of 61 of a heart attack while leading a group bicycle ride in West Virginia. Join Mark as he powers through the grief to reflect on the bond Mark and Jay shared as racers, the impact they had on each other, as well as the extraordinary life that Jay lived. Please welcome Mark Curlin. If you can't be a rock star, be a roadie.
Thank you, Sheila. In the mid-90s, I was an aspiring professional bicycle racer. I was working as a package and document courier in Washington, D.C., a bicycle messenger, when I had a serious crash while training. I broke my leg in 2 places, then got a blood clot, which could have killed me. After I got off the crutches, after about 4 months, it became clear that I wouldn't ever be the same racer that I was before, due to the massive incision that went from my knee all the way up to my hip so that they could insert a stainless steel plate and 13 screws to brace my shattered leg, scar tissue, and a weaker, heavier leg. Now, let me introduce you to some of the people in my life who were there with me as a bicycle messenger, including Jay. That's Jay right here on the left. That's Chris, Zach, then that's the 3 of us plus Shane and Justin at World Road Championships in 2015 down in Richmond. There's the course you can see. That's the women's race. And then also John Whittington here on the left, Chris Schmidt, Zach Brown, Jason Stevenson. So those are my crew, right? I got an identity because of being with those folks, right? So Jay was part of that. And then when I had crashed, I talked to Jay about this paradigm. I can't race anymore. And Jay said, Mark, don't quit so easily. If you can't be a rock star, be a roadie. You can still race. Maybe you can't be a pro, but look at me. You know, I didn't start till I was 33, and it's too late for us to race in the Tour de France and stuff anyway. But the things that you love about racing, you can still experience those things. You can still live the life. And this was something really cool about Jay. He kept to his own metrics about what it meant to be a success. Then when I was 31, I'd had another injury. I crashed my car, and I stayed with a woman who my mom has spoken about, who was in a wheelchair. And I decided to stop making excuses and make a comeback. So here's some pictures from my comeback. There's Jason Stevenson, Chris Schmidt, and myself. There's me winning a race in a 40+ mile an hour sprint. There's a plaque I won. I had a great season in 2005. Got first in a season-long points competition. That's me with a whole bunch of medals, including 2 state championship medals. And here's a video.
Down the stretch they come.
That's the 2-armed victory salute.
Mark Curlin, the cause of that gripping out friend, Mark Curlin, born from the messenger world. That's where I come from. We were couriers together for a long time. Mark Curlin, I'm saying Mark is very well taken. Down the stretch they come.
So that was, there were 100 riders in that race, and I took it. And I really wonder if I could have made that comeback if I hadn't had that going for me in the back of my head about Jay telling me, don't give up. You can do it. Just live the life and follow that vibe, and that's what led me to all that success and to ultimately realize the dreams that I had for racing, even if it wasn't on a pro level. I still beat 100 guys in that race and I had a lot of success. It was hot stuff. So I also want to tell you more about Jay, not just what he meant to me, what he did for me and who he was for me, but who he was in general. So we took a road trip out to the Shenandoah Mountains to go training one time. And we were going up a steep climb and it got steeper. And I noticed that Jay didn't slow down at all. He increased his effort to maintain his pace. The brutality of such efforts is withering, but the importance of momentum is inexorable. Accomplishing the task at hand with the required energy. After the ride, I mentioned that I'd observed this and I asked Jay about it. And he said, Mark, sometimes it's twice as hard to go half as fast. And I thought that was a comment that really applied to life as well. Sometimes you've just got to increase your work rate for a period of time because you're going after something that just takes extra effort. And it'll set you up, after you get over that steeper pitch. Now you're holding that speed and you don't have to kind of drag your way up, go half as fast for twice as long. And this was something really cool about Jay. He was a keen observer of life. He really noticed things. He had insight, he had willingness. These are spiritual principles. And Jay lived his life on principle. Now I want to talk about how Jay loved people. He really studied and loved other people, including apparent misfits like other messengers, musicians. Jay was a guitarist in Crippled Pilgrims and the Rambling Shadows. Crippled Pilgrims were a really cool 80s indie band. You can check them out on your streaming. And he loved people that didn't necessarily fit the mold. Now, we all partied as hard as we raced in those days. Not the most measured recipe for success, but Jay saw the story in the chaos, and he loved the breathtaking mess, even though sometimes the smoke burned his eyes. He understood that people had demons, and that sometimes those demons drove people to do things, and he didn't judge. Jay had the distinction of people, and if you were Jay's people, he would treat you like family. If he loved you, he didn't try to hide it. And he would make sacrifices to show it via deeds. I was people to Jay, and his intentional and real family became my family. And that's been one of the greatest gifts of my entire life. Now on to how Jay impacted some other people with a mission that he had in life. In 2005, he and his partner of over 20 years, Audrey, they bought a barn on the top of a mountain on an old working farm in West Virginia. And they converted it to a training hub for cyclists from the DC area. Now, you might think that the quality that Jay needed to do this was his former experience as a carpenter. But in fact, it was another spiritual principle, patience, that allowed him to work over 2 years to turn that barn into a gathering place for adventures, for stories, for bonding. Jay was willing to put in the time to make his dreams come true. Some roadie, huh? Now, Jay had his own crash in 1996. He was racing down in Missouri, and the race had a double yellow line rule. So the riders stay to the right of the double yellow and traffic could go on the other side. And a car crept over the double yellow in a turn and caught Jay. And he had a horrific crash. He broke his leg. He got compartment syndrome, where the fluid stays trapped there, and acute kidney failure. And he almost died. He almost lost the leg. I finally got to talk to Jay, and he said it was an El Camino. And he just paused. And when Jay paused like that, you knew he was trying to communicate vulnerability, that he wanted you to be in that moment with him and really understand the emotion. And he didn't have to talk too much. He felt the uneasiness of his uncertain future, the injustice of it all. He remembered how my crash had changed me, how scary it was that he'd almost died. And this feeling that it was somehow his fault, how something as pure as wanting to ride a bike could sort of feel like a mistake. Could he only be a roadie now? Well, Jay came back. It took him some years, but in 2000, he was one of just 200 riders in the whole country to qualify for Olympic trials. And that was when he was 40. Can you imagine? Racing guys half your age, beating them. Then later finding out a lot of those guys were doped. They'd been using performance enhancing drugs. This was the doping era. He'd finished top 10 in national races with guys who later got caught for dope, you know, for steroids, for EPO, for all that stuff. Now, one of the biggest accomplishments in my life, as you can start to see, is that I was the person who introduced Jay to racing. I took Jay to his first race. I filled his soul with my stories of the heroism, the richness of the history of over 100 years of bike racing. We're all searching for identity, and that gave us an identity. And with all the stories, Jay's dad was a bartender, and he found existence, a place in the world, by gaining access to those stories, learning what I taught him, that every race tells its own story, and every bike ride, if you make it epic enough, can be its own story. So when he made that barn with Audrey, the Lost River barn, and made that place a place to stay for a dozen or so riders, 20 to 25 weekends a year, in an epic setting, he created this whole storytelling setting and allowed himself to be in this roadie life, right? He wasn't a rock star racing in Europe, was he? He was just leading the rides. And I felt like I started this little blanket, and then Jay turned it into this massive tapestry. And I can't even imagine what's on it or how big it is or where it goes. So I'm going to go to a video that Jay is in that I want to share with you.
I played golf as a kid. I was a caddy. I wasn't a country club kid. A guy told me that when you're gripping the club, it should be like holding a bird. You have to hold it so you don't crush it, but hold it tight enough so it doesn't fly away. It applies off the bike and on the bike equally. If I can just get my riding into gear, I can take on way more than I can in real life. I look at it like all the rest is real life.
To Rose City before me, I'm sorry I can't travel.
I've never really had a real job. I've been a bartender, carpenter and courier, and I had done music. It was the indie scene, and someone saw us, and we put a record out, and we got radio play. But I did it for a few years, and we discontinued. It's just so much as chemistry, and I needed that chemistry. So I looked at the paper, and it was a job for bike messenger. I had nothing to do with bikes, I wasn't like a hipster kid on a track bike. It wasn't like anything. All those years of working jobs, I never even worked a 9 to 5. I realized on Sunday night, I was like, oh, cool. I get to go ride a bike. I started just getting into cycling big time. And I wanted to do something that resonates you internally, that pushes you, that moves you, that takes you a little bit outside of yourself. Adventure is everywhere, but how do we get into it? How do we get the adventure? How do we find the adventure? Then I got the barn. We didn't have a name, so Lost River sounds like intrigue, so I said, let's call it Lost River Barn. Every weekend I would race one day and come up here to work. I just wanted to get it to where people could come here and start training, just kind of have something with a little more flavor. It just required all kinds of work. That's when I punched the first clock, the first imaginary clock of my life. Side by side, to take the path less traveled by. It's the fortune that I have these two things that totally complement each other in such a big way. It's just energizing for me to have that balance, that one contrast of texture and color, the mountains and the city. I know that what the two are, and their values become even more distinct and you appreciate them more. But the thing that I get out of it is that's all that elusive stuff. Be centered, be balanced, find adventure. Everybody talks about being in the moment, and you can only be in the moment sometimes. You have to just chance into the moment, and then when you're there, hopefully you don't get conscious of it and take yourself out. It's like not holding the bird too tight. That's a good one, by the way.
So the thing to take away from Jay's life is that although he taught me, if you can't be a rock star, be a roadie. If you asked any of the hundreds of people who loved and knew Jay, if he was a rock star or a roadie, they'd all tell you he was a rock star, 100% rock star, total legend, rock star. Madam Toastmaster.